A local woman named Doreen had been driving through town with her 2 daughters when something unusual caught her attention. As she passed a busy road, she spotted a woman running frantically across traffic, barefoot and clearly distressed. The woman dashed toward a nearby restaurant and began pulling desperately at the door, which had not yet opened for the day. Realizing something was terribly wrong, she helped the woman into her car and contacted 911 without hesitation. The young woman quickly gave police a detailed description, not only of her attacker but of the car itself. Thanks to this phone call, the case of Brooke Wilberger, who disappeared in broad daylight, gained new momentum. Dear viewers, please don't forget to like, leave a comment under the video, and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos. This is very important to us. 19-year-old Brooke Wilberger was a bright, spirited young woman living in Oregon, where she had grown up in a large and deeply connected family. As the 5th of 6 children, Brooke had always stood out, not just because of her natural beauty and striking green eyes, but because of her warmth, integrity, and unwavering drive. Her siblings often described her as the glue that held everyone together. She was dependable, honest, and full of quiet determination. Brooke had a strong sense of purpose from a young age. Although she struggled with speech as a child, only beginning to speak around the age of 4, she worked tirelessly to overcome that challenge. This personal journey profoundly influenced her career goals. Inspired by the help she had received, Brooke set her sights on becoming a speech pathologist. She dreamed of helping others find their voice the way she had found hers. Her family was deeply religious, devoted members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Faith was not just a part of their weekly routine, it shaped their values, their bonds, and their outlook on life. Brooke, like her family, lived her beliefs with sincerity. That devotion extended to her high school sweetheart Justin, one of her oldest friends. The two began dating when Brooke was 16, and their relationship was rooted in years of friendship, mutual respect, and shared values. They were known to their community as a picture of young love, kind, grounded, and spiritually united. When Justin left on a 2-year church mission to Venezuela, Brooke remained incredibly supportive. She wrote to him regularly and continued to live a life filled with purpose and discipline. She enrolled at Brigham Young University in Utah, not just because of its strong academic reputation, but because it was one of the best institutions for speech pathology, a field she felt passionately about. Her freshman year at BYU went well. She adjusted to college life quickly, making friends, studying hard, and staying active in campus life. Brooke wasn't the type to seek attention, but people naturally gravitated toward her calm, sincere nature. Brooke also loved being active. She had a genuine passion for sports, particularly basketball, snowboarding, and long-distance running. Whether on the court, the slopes, or the track, she thrived on pushing herself and staying engaged with the world around her. Despite her soft-spoken demeanor, she had a steel-like core when it came to standing up for what was right. Her family often said that Brooke wasn't afraid to speak out when something didn't sit well with her, and she lived by a strong moral compass. As the summer of 2004 rolled in, Brooke returned home after her freshman year. Like many college students, she wanted to earn a little extra money during the break. Her older sister, Stephanie, helped her secure a part-time job at Oak Park Apartments in Corvallis, Oregon, about a 30-minute drive from their family home. Stephanie lived at the apartment complex with her husband, where they also served as on-site managers. It seemed like the perfect arrangement. Brooke could stay with them during the work week, earn a paycheck, and still have time to enjoy her summer. Brooke embraced the job with her usual diligence. She performed small maintenance and cleaning tasks around the property, happy to contribute and stay busy. Stephanie and Brooke made plans to have lunch together on Monday, May 24th, 2004. It was a typical late spring morning in Corvallis, mildly warm with the sky lightly overcast. That morning, around 10 a.m., Stephanie glanced out the window of her apartment and saw Brooke near one of the buildings, filling a plastic bucket with water. She was gathering cleaning supplies and preparing to scrub down some of the outdoor light fixtures, a task she had taken on willingly. Everything seemed completely normal. But as midday approached, Stephanie became distracted with the usual chaos of managing kids and getting lunch ready. It wasn't until after 1 p.m. that she suddenly realized Brooke hadn't come in for lunch, and she was now very late. At first, Stephanie thought maybe her sister had gotten sidetracked, perhaps chatting with a resident or finishing up a task. With a laugh, she told her children, "All right, let's go send out a search party," as she headed outside to look for her. As she walked through the complex, Stephanie expected to find Brooke nearby. But what she saw instead chilled her. Near one of the lampposts stood the bucket of water Brooke had filled hours earlier. Next to it were her cleaning rags and supplies. Nothing had been moved. Most concerning of all were Brooke's flip-flops, sitting awkwardly on the ground. One of them had its toe strap completely torn, and both were smeared with mud. It didn't look like someone had simply left them behind. Stephanie felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Something was very wrong. Rushing back, she called her husband. The two of them quickly began searching the area more urgently. Time passed in a blur, and by 3 p.m., they had discovered that Brooke's phone, purse, and wallet were still inside her locked car. No sign of her anywhere. The scene was too alarming to ignore. They knew they had to call 911. Police responded quickly. Given the circumstances, the abandoned cleaning gear, the damaged footwear, law enforcement didn't hesitate to take the case seriously from the outset. Lieutenant Ron Noble of the Corvallis Police Department later commented, "Normally, adults have the right to come and go, and we might wait 24 hours before launching a search. But in this case, it was clear that something wasn't right from the start. Brooke was not the kind of young woman who would just disappear without a word. She was responsible, deeply connected to her family, and had plans. She wasn't impulsive. Her disappearance felt sudden, out of character, and deeply suspicious. A couple of residents mentioned hearing something strange around 10:30 that morning, a scuffle or loud noise, but no one had seen anything clearly. The lack of witnesses only deepened the mystery. Within hours, the community had mobilized. Police officers began canvassing the area, going door to door at the apartment complex. Detectives quickly realized that there were over 2,000 registered offenders living in the broader region, an overwhelming number that made their investigation feel even more daunting. But they were determined. Every possible lead was worth pursuing. Investigators naturally reached out to Brooke's boyfriend, Justin, though he was thousands of miles away, deep into his missionary work in Venezuela. His whereabouts were easily confirmed, and there was no reason to believe he had any involvement. But that didn't stop him from being devastated. Marriage had always been part of their plans. In their letters, Brooke often spoke about wanting a big family, children, a home filled with laughter, and a future built on faith and love. Justin had always imagined the summer unfolding very differently. But the moment he received the news about Brooke, his childhood friend and girlfriend, his world began to crumble. It felt unreal. He couldn't believe that this was now his reality. One moment, everything felt stable and hopeful. The next, the girl he planned to marry had vanished without a trace. When authorities first reached out to him, it was clear that the call was a formality. He was never seriously considered a suspect. Police Captain Jonathan Sassaman later reflected on the pressure surrounding the early stages of the investigation. "It was extraordinarily stressful," he admitted during a media briefing. "You had a community looking for answers. You had families on edge, watching their daughters more closely. You had a town afraid to breathe. Everyone was asking, 'Is this random? Is someone else going to be next?' The unknowns were chilling, and the urgency to find answers increased with every passing hour. Brooke's disappearance quickly snowballed into one of Oregon's most highly publicized missing persons cases in recent memory. Media coverage grew rapidly as the days unfolded. What started as a local concern spread across state lines, capturing national attention. Hundreds of volunteers offered to help, with search parties scouring wooded areas, neighborhoods, trails, and campus buildings. Flyers were posted everywhere, from gas stations to grocery stores to university bulletin boards. There was a collective energy behind finding Brooke, a young woman everyone described as kind, genuine, and full of promise. The FBI joined the investigation not long after the local authorities determined the case might involve interstate activity or a larger risk to public safety. Tips flooded in from across Oregon and beyond, with people claiming they had seen someone who looked like Brooke. Some swore they had spotted her in towns miles away. Others reported behavior they thought seemed suspicious. Investigators were overwhelmed, but determined to chase down every credible lead. Then, a few days into the investigation, a tip arrived that led authorities down an unexpected and troubling path. A man named Sunku Kim, aged 30, emerged as a person of interest. Kim was an intensely private individual who lived in a rural part of Oregon with his parents, roughly 80 miles from Corvallis, where Brooke had last been seen. His name came up in connection to a string of unusual incidents. Kim had already been under surveillance for unrelated reasons. He had recently been charged with burglary, specifically breaking into university dormitories to steal personal items, particularly clothing. One of the locations he had targeted was Oregon State University. Located only a short distance from Oak Park Apartments, where Brooke had been working the day, she vanished. When investigators searched Kim's residence, what they found shocked even the most seasoned detectives. Inside his bedroom, they uncovered thousands of personal garments, all allegedly stolen. The scale of the discovery suggested a pattern that had gone on for years undetected. To detectives, the troubling nature of Kim's behavior raised red flags. There was growing concern that this kind of obsessive theft could potentially escalate into something far more serious. Nearly a week after Brooke went missing, in the early hours before sunrise, law enforcement executed a full search warrant on Kim's family home. The operation was thorough and tense. Authorities seized computers, electronics, and hard drives. As they combed through his digital files, they came across an alarming document titled OSU.doc, clearly referring to Oregon State University. The file, believed to have been created after Brooke's disappearance, read like a dark instruction manual. Though it never mentioned Brooke by name, the contents outlined how to plan a crime and avoid detection. It discussed what types of clothing to wear, what items to bring, how to behave to deflect suspicion, and what to avoid when moving around college campuses. While deeply disturbing, the contents of the file did not include any direct reference to Brooke or evidence tying Kim to her case. Nonetheless, the parallels were hard to ignore, and Kim remained under scrutiny for several days. Eventually, Kim was cleared. Data recovered from his devices, time-stamped transactions, surveillance footage, and verified store receipts placed him elsewhere at the critical time. His father confirmed he had been shopping with Kim on the morning Brooke disappeared, and the timeline matched perfectly. Law enforcement ruled him out as a suspect. Still, Kim did not escape the consequences of his previous actions. He would go on to serve 7 years in prison on multiple charges, including burglary. Later, his parents would file a lawsuit against the state and local authorities, claiming that the police raid on their home had been excessive and traumatizing. After prolonged negotiations, they reached a settlement of just over $300,000. Despite closing that lead, Brooke's case remained frustratingly unsolved. Days turned into weeks. Weeks quietly turned into a full month. For her family, each sunrise brought a glimmer of hope. But each sunset ended with no answers. The weight of uncertainty grew heavier. As time passed, the statistical reality became harder to ignore. Investigators understood the grim truth. The longer a case remains unsolved, the less likely it is to have a hopeful resolution. But still, they pressed on. There was one detail that continued to interest authorities: a possible vehicle sighting. Several people had reported seeing a dark green minivan, believed to be from the late 1990s, possibly a 1997 model. The van had been spotted near Oregon State University around the time Brooke disappeared. Its presence was odd, and the behavior of the driver raised concerns. One caller, a man named Brian, had phoned 911 days earlier to report the van driving recklessly. University staff member Bob later told investigators he had seen the vehicle parked in a campus lot. He recalled seeing the driver engaging with a female student in a way that unsettled her enough to immediately report the incident. Another student shared her own unsettling experience. She told detectives that the van had pulled up abruptly in front of her, and the man inside asked for directions. What alarmed her was that he exited the vehicle and opened one of the rear doors while still talking. She didn't wait around to find out more. She turned and walked away as quickly as possible. These accounts were concerning. While the identity of the driver remained unknown, the description of the vehicle and its odd presence in the area made it a focal point of the ongoing investigation. Flyers were updated to include information about the van, and tips regarding similar vehicles were prioritized. Still, time dragged on. Summer gave way to fall. The once large search parties began to shrink. Volunteers returned to work or school. News crews moved on to other stories. But the Wilberger family continued to hope. Then, in November, 6 months after Brooke's disappearance, something unexpected happened. 1,400 miles away in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A local woman named Durain had been driving through town with her 2 daughters when something unusual caught her attention. As she passed a busy road, she spotted a woman running frantically across traffic, barefoot and clearly distressed. The woman dashed toward a nearby restaurant and began pulling desperately at the door, which had not yet opened for the day. Sensing the urgency of the situation, Durain didn't hesitate. She pulled her car over and quickly approached the woman. After briefly speaking to her and recognizing her distress, she guided the woman into her car and tried to calm her down. She was a 22-year-old foreign exchange student, and she was alone, walking through a quiet area when something terrifying happened. Tearfully, she later described how a man had suddenly grabbed her from behind. She hadn't seen him coming, and the fear she felt in that instant was overwhelming. The man was described as tall, physically broad, and white, with a shaved head and a thick beard. She barely had time to comprehend what was happening. The car was a 2-door model, and what stood out most, aside from its bold green exterior, was the unusual red floral pattern decorating the interior. There was also a stuffed toy hanging near the window, an odd and hauntingly childlike touch in an otherwise terrifying situation. The man drove her to an apartment complex where he briefly left the car and went into one of the units. In what can only be described as a miracle of timing and courage, the woman managed to break free. She didn't stop to think. She just ran. Barefoot, panicked, and determined to survive. She ran straight into the path of Dara, a local mother who was out driving with her children. Seeing the distressed woman sprinting across the road and tugging frantically at a restaurant door, Dara immediately pulled over. Realizing something was terribly wrong, she helped the woman into her car and contacted 911 without hesitation. The young woman quickly gave police a detailed description, not only of her attacker, but of the car itself. Thanks to her clear memory and the vehicle's unusually specific characteristics, authorities were able to act swiftly. Within hours, the suspect was identified as Joel Patrick Courtney, a 38-year-old man living in a nearby Albuquerque suburb. He was known to police and had a checkered history that stretched across multiple states. Officers located Joel just a few blocks away, still inside the distinctive green car. Digging deeper into Joel's background, authorities discovered a troubling past. He was no stranger to law enforcement. He had been convicted in 1991 and had compiled a long list of criminal charges over the years, theft and assault. He had lived in numerous states, Alaska, Florida, New Mexico, Oregon, picking up odd jobs and frequently relocating. Though Joel was married and the father of 3 children, his personal life was far from stable. His wife, Rosie, had recently filed for a restraining order against him. Their relationship had been tumultuous, marked by patterns of conflict and instability. Joel's sister, Dana, later gave a revealing interview about his early years. She explained that Joel had once been considered highly intelligent, with a genius-level IQ as a child. There were expectations that he might do something significant in life. But by the age of 11, he had already started experimenting with harmful substances. That early exposure spiraled quickly into more serious issues. He dropped out of school and was in and out of juvenile facilities for a variety of offenses before he was even an adult. For a while, things seemed to stabilize, particularly when Joel met Rosie at 23 and started a family. Dina said she genuinely believed at one point that he might turn his life around. But unfortunately, those hopes were short-lived. After several years, Joel returned to a destructive lifestyle. The situation gradually worsened. Erratic behavior. At the time of his arrest in Albuquerque, Joel was once again spiraling. He was reportedly drinking heavily and had become increasingly volatile. After being formally charged with kidnapping and battery, Joel was interviewed by local detectives. One investigator, in particular, found it difficult to ignore the similarities between this case and the now high-profile disappearance of Brooke Wilberger. The two young women shared certain physical similarities, and both had been targeted in broad daylight in areas near universities. The methods used also bore eerie resemblances. Following a hunch, that investigator picked up the phone and called the task force working on the Wilberger case back in Oregon. He asked a simple but powerful question. "Have you heard of Joel Courtney?" To their shock, investigators on Brooke's case quickly confirmed that Joel had, in fact, been in the Corvallis, Oregon area around the exact time Brooke went missing. He had been there with his family on a trip. The information immediately shifted the focus of the investigation. Joel was no longer just a suspect in a New Mexico assault. He was now being looked at in connection with one of Oregon's most devastating unsolved cases. Back in Albuquerque, when Rosie called Joel's sister Dina to inform her of the arrest, Dina's reaction was haunting. As she hung up the phone, she turned to her husband and said, almost under her breath, "Do you think he could be involved with Brooke Wilberger's case? It's impossible to even think it's possible." She later admitted that even though she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud at the time, something in her gut told her Joel knew more than he was letting on. What followed was a months-long investigation, during which authorities in both states worked together to uncover the truth. They painstakingly pieced together Joel's timeline, retraced his steps, and searched for any physical evidence that could tie him to Brooke's disappearance. One of the most critical moments came when they located the green minivan Joel had been driving during that time, a vehicle that had been repeatedly reported in the early days of the Wilberger investigation. Witnesses had described a green minivan acting suspiciously near Oregon State University, and this matched Joel's known vehicle from the trip. The forensic team conducted a thorough and meticulous analysis of the vehicle. They dismantled the interior, collected fibers, swabbed surfaces, and tested every crevice for trace evidence. After weeks of careful lab work, the results were clear and devastating. In the spring of 2005, DNA tests confirmed that Brooke Wilberger's DNA was found inside the vehicle. Even more telling, strands of her blonde hair were discovered in a hairband, which had been tucked away inside one of Joel's personal bags. The evidence was not just circumstantial, it was scientific and definitive. With these findings in hand, the case finally reached a courtroom. On Friday, July the 29th, the Benton County Grand Jury reviewed all the evidence presented. After hours of deliberation, they returned with a 19-count indictment against Joel Patrick Courtney, who was 39 years old. The charges were serious. Under Oregon law, this charge carries a maximum penalty of death. However, because Joel was already incarcerated in New Mexico and facing charges there, legal complexities around extradition made it unclear whether he would ever return to Oregon to face trial for Brooke's case. One of the most heartbreaking contrasts between these two cases is the difference in outcomes. In New Mexico, the young woman managed to escape, survive, and report what happened. Her bravery not only saved her own life, but helped reopen the door to justice for Brooke. But if the gravity of the charges impacted Joel in any meaningful way, he didn't show it. According to court officers and fellow inmates, Joel reportedly laughed through the afternoon after being served the paperwork. Prosecutors later said he openly mocked the situation, sharing jokes with others in his unit. It was a chilling reminder of just how little remorse he seemed to feel. Despite continuing to deny knowing anything about Brooke, claiming he had never even heard her name, his family saw through the facade. During one of the few visits he had with his mother while incarcerated, she asked him directly, "Did you kill her?" Joel didn't answer immediately. He paused for a moment, long enough for the weight of the question to settle, before responding cryptically, "They'll never hold me accountable for this." That disturbing exchange added to the growing sense that Joel not only knew exactly what had happened to Brooke, but that he was holding the truth as a kind of leverage, waiting for the right moment to use it. In January 2007, Joel attempted to delay his legal fate by claiming that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. His attorneys argued that his long history of and mental health struggles rendered him incompetent. But after a detailed evaluation by medical professionals, the court ruled that Joel was indeed mentally sound and capable of understanding the charges against him. For Brooke's mother, Cammie Wilberger, that decision was an emotional moment she would never forget. She later described how she had been driving when the call came in. Upon hearing that Joel would stand trial, she pulled her car over and danced in joy, a brief, powerful release after years of tension. Cammie later admitted she had nearly fallen into despair, imagining the possibility that he might escape justice on a technicality. That day, hope returned. However, before Oregon authorities could move forward with the charges related to Brooke's disappearance, Joel had to first face justice in New Mexico, where he was been sentenced to 18 years in prison. At his sentencing hearing in New Mexico, Joel showed no respect for the courtroom. He interrupted proceedings, made inappropriate comments, and appeared to treat the entire process as if it were a nuisance. But behind the scenes, police and prosecutors weren't just discouraged, they were more determined than ever. As one officer later put it, "The more he showed us who he really was, the more it lit a fire in us. He wasn't going to get away with this. He was going to tell us where Brooke was, one way or another." Nearly 5 years had passed since Brooke had last been seen. Joel's trial in Oregon was set for early 2010, and it was shaping up to be one of the most closely followed criminal trials in the state's history. Given the overwhelming evidence, Joel faced the possibility of the death penalty, and prosecutors were preparing to seek it. But Joel, ever calculating, decided to play his final card. He began to signal that he might be willing to cooperate, but only if the terms were right. Over the course of several months, Joel had refused to speak candidly about Brooke's fate. Instead, he played a slow, manipulative game, knowing that he alone held the answers the Wilberger family had been pleading for. It wasn't until his life behind bars became increasingly difficult, including frequent beatings from other inmates and being denied his usual medications for anxiety, that Joel began to crack. Seeking a transfer to a different facility and a reprieve he was experiencing, Joel finally agreed to make a deal. He told prosecutors he wanted to serve the rest of his New Mexico sentence closer to family, then be allowed to transfer back to Oregon afterward, where he would not face the death penalty. He also wanted assurances that the most severe punishment would be taken off the table. The legal teams debated, weighed the options, and eventually agreed. The priority, they determined, was to bring Brooke, something her family had waited more than 5 long years for. With those conditions met, Joel changed his plea to guilty and agreed to fully cooperate. At long last, he told investigators what they had long suspected. He had taken Brooke's life. He also finally revealed the location of her, information that had been cruelly withheld for years. Authorities in Oregon quickly mobilized. After following Joel's directions, search teams located the site. It was a remote, private property far from plain view. Joel had hidden Brooke beneath a fallen tree, ensuring the area blended naturally into the surrounding environment. The discovery brought grief and relief in equal measure. Identification was made through dental records, and heartbreakingly, Brooke's mother was able to recognize her daughter from a personal item left behind. Brooke was still wearing the silver watch Cammie had given her for Christmas, a gift she had selected carefully, never expecting that it would one day become the clue confirming her daughter's identity. That small watch, worn with love, helped provide closure after years of uncertainty. Even in the face of such tragedy, the Wilberger family chose grace over hatred. Cammie spoke to the media saying, "We are thankful that justice has been served. He will have no opportunity for parole, and now we can move forward." Her words resonated across the state as an example of strength, forgiveness, and the human capacity to heal, even after unimaginable loss. In court, Joel provided a disturbing but necessary account of the events. He confessed to driving around Corvallis that fateful day, specifically looking for a woman alone. He had even attempted to abduct 2 other women, the same individuals who had bravely come forward with their stories earlier in the investigation. He was now formally charged in those cases as well. Joel explained that when he saw Brooke, he decided to change tactics. She was working quietly, cleaning lights near the apartment complex. He pretended to be a delivery driver, approaching her under the guise of needing directions. As she neared his van, then everything happened. Though he admitted to taking her, Joel claimed that he hadn't intended to end her life. He said the situation spiraled out of control, but investigators and prosecutors alike found little sincerity in that explanation. His actions before, during, and after the crime suggested a level of premeditation and awareness that contradicted his statements. To this day, specific details about where and how the crime occurred have been kept private, out of respect for the family. Authorities say it happened in the place deep in the wooded wilderness of Benton County, within the coastal range of Western Oregon. It was a discovery that sent ripples through not only Brooke's hometown of Veneta and the city of Corvallis, but also through the small, tight-knit communities scattered across that peaceful stretch of countryside. Tucked away from main roads and obscured by layers of natural overgrowth, it was a spot rarely visited by anyone aside from the occasional hiker, hunter, or local farmer. For many who lived nearby, the revelation that something so dark had unfolded so close to home was nothing short of chilling. But as the town slowly began processing the news, there was one thing that remained unchanged and deeply disturbing to everyone following the case. Joel Patrick Courtney, the man who had finally confessed to the crime, had never once expressed remorse. Over the entire legal process, through multiple hearings, evaluations, and public statements, Joel never apologized to Brooke's family. He never offered words of regret, empathy, or acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. Even when given the chance to speak directly to the Wilburgers in court, he remained emotionless. His silence, in the eyes of many, spoke volumes. It became painfully clear that he had no intention of taking personal responsibility beyond what served his own legal interests. His cooperation came not from guilt, but from a calculated desire to improve his own circumstances, specifically to avoid harsher punishment and relocate to a different prison facility. In the end, Joel Courtney was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will spend the rest of his days behind bars, never again allowed to walk freely. The ruling ensured that he would not be able to manipulate the system any further or inflict pain on anyone else. For Brooke's loved ones, and for the many people who came to know her story and grieve alongside them, the sentence brought a complicated mixture of relief and sorrow. It was just after 8 a.m. on what should have been an ordinary quiet morning on Greyhound Lane. The kind where the only sounds were birdsong and the soft hum of early traffic. But that fragile peace was violently shattered. Suddenly, the street was flooded with flashing blue lights. The wail of sirens tore through the calm as emergency vehicles descended on the usually uneventful Birmingham neighborhood. Police cruisers, ambulances, and crime scene units swarmed outside the Wilkinson residence, a modest home that had become the center of something unthinkable. Inside, first responders were met with a scene of devastation. Tracy Wilkinson, a mother and beloved figure in the community, was found dead. In the garden, Peter was discovered wounded but alive. His hands trembled as he clutched his mobile phone, the screen still lit. He had managed to dial 911 before collapsing, his voice faint but determined. He had given the dispatcher a name. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us. Tracy Wilkinson, aged 50, was far more than just a mother or a wife. She was the enduring pillar of her family, the radiant spirit who infused love and purpose into every corner of their lives. With an elegance that seemed to transcend the ordinary, Tracy carried herself with the poise of someone who had once danced across international stages. A former champion in Latin American ballroom dancing, she had won accolades and hearts, her rhythm and grace not confined to the dance floor but rippling into her daily routines and interactions. Even after stepping away from the competitive spotlight to focus on motherhood, her graceful demeanor never left her. It only deepened, becoming a core part of her identity. Having successfully raised 2 children, Pierce and Lydia, with her husband Peter, Tracy transitioned seamlessly into a new chapter, one of selfless service. She devoted herself wholeheartedly to volunteering, especially at a local support center that provided help to individuals facing the tough journey of addiction recovery. Her presence there wasn't ceremonial. It was consistent, compassionate, and deeply engaged. She wasn't the type to clock in and out for appearances. She stayed late, offered a listening ear, brought in home-cooked meals, and followed up when someone was having a rough week. Her friends often described her as someone who couldn't walk past another person in need without stopping, sometimes quite literally. One longtime friend remembered, if she saw someone cold or hungry, even if we were late to something, she'd stop. She'd dig into her bag and hand over a sandwich or scarf like it was second nature. Tracy embodied a kind of nurturing that made people feel seen and valued, no matter their circumstances. At home, she was the architect of warmth. Her family dinners were legendary, often filled with laughter and stories in the beautifully restored Victorian home that she and her husband Peter had lovingly renovated over the years. Their son Pierce, a Year 8 student at Red Hill School, was a lively, intelligent boy full of promise. At just 13, he had already made a name for himself as someone others could rely on. His enthusiasm for life was contagious. Whether it was diving into his favorite computer games or helping a friend who had been left out, Pierce had a way of lighting up a room with his smile and easy kindness. Teachers described him as conscientious, polite, and emotionally mature, rare qualities for a boy his age. His head teacher, Stephen Dunster, once remarked, "Pierce was the kind of student every school dream of, empathetic, hardworking, and endlessly curious." He shared a deep bond with the family's greyhound, Mandy, often joining his father on long walks or playing fetch in the garden after school. His playful spirit, tinged with a touch of cheeky humor, made him instantly likable. But it was his thoughtfulness, his willingness to help, his care for others, that made him unforgettable. He was incredibly close to his older sister Lydia, and the two shared more than just sibling love. Their shared loyalty to West Bromwich Albion had become a cherished family tradition, with many Saturdays spent at matches, wrapped in scarves, shouting with joy from the stands. Peter Wilkinson, the family's quiet anchor, was a well-respected businessman who ran a company that specialized in manufacturing safety barriers. His work often took him between Stourbridge and Newport, South Wales. Yet no matter how busy he was, Peter always prioritized his family. To friends and neighbors, he was a man of quiet strength and unwavering loyalty. Whether it was coaching Pierce's football team or supporting Tracy's volunteer work, he gave of himself freely, without need for recognition. Neighbors often spotted him walking Mandy or stopping by the local pub for a quick chat. Always calm, always approachable. His marriage to Tracy had been one of deep mutual respect, love, and teamwork. Together, they had built not only a beautiful home, but also a life full of meaning, laughter, and generosity. Lydia, 18 at the time, was thriving academically at Bristol University, where she was pursuing a degree in biology. Brilliant, articulate, and passionate about science, she was already envisioning a career that might contribute to medicine or environmental preservation. When she returned home for Mother's Day, just days before the tragedy that would follow, her visit was nothing short of joyful. Tracy, always sentimental about family moments, later told friends it had been the best surprise of her life. The Sunday roast they shared was filled with storytelling, laughter, and an overwhelming sense of gratitude for one another. In March 2016, during a routine shopping trip to Tesco in Stourbridge, Tracy encountered someone who appeared at first glance to be just another unfortunate soul fallen on hard times. A young man, barely older than Lydia, sat hunched inside a makeshift shelter of cardboard near the store entrance. The spring air was brisk, and he looked cold, weary, and lost. That young man was Barley, then 23 years old, a figure both physically present and emotionally adrift. Tracy, with her instinctive empathy, did not hesitate. She struck up a conversation, and within moments had learned that Aaron was experiencing homelessness, estranged from his family, and uncertain of his next meal or shelter. She didn't just offer him coins or platitudes. She drove him to the local council office in Dudley and helped him secure a place in a temporary hostel. That simple act of kindness was the first step in what would become a far deeper involvement. But Tracy's compassion didn't end there. Over the weeks that followed, she remained in contact with Aaron, checking in to make sure he was managing. She brought him breakfast and warm dinners, sometimes inviting him into the family home on Greyhound Lane. Eventually, the rest of the Wilkinson family joined in the effort. Her husband, Peter, extended a job offer at his safety barrier firm, giving Aaron a chance to rebuild his life with structure and dignity. His tasks were straightforward, washing, loading, and unloading at the worksite, but important, and at first, he handled them with focus and diligence. Recognizing that stability required more than just work, the Wilkinsons helped further. They paid for a mobile phone plan to keep him connected, helped cover housing expenses when needed, and treated him as someone who was capable of change. It seemed for a time that the kindness was not only received but reciprocated. Aaron frequently expressed gratitude, sometimes helping out around the house or participating in family meals. Christmas, 2016 marked a poignant moment. Aaron was invited to the Wilkinsons' home for the holiday dinner. He brought with him a card addressed to Tracy, calling her the mother I never had. For Tracy, who had always believed in the redemptive power of compassion, the note struck a deep emotional chord. She saw not just a man in need, but a life worth investing in. But who was Aaron Barley, really? As with many human stories, there was more beneath the surface. Born in 1993, Aaron Barley's early years were shadowed by instability. His upbringing was marked by disrupted relationships, loss, and social disconnection. He had lived through circumstances that would challenge even the strongest among us. His journey through childhood was neither warm nor secure. Both of his parents passed away before he reached the age of 10. When Aaron was just 6 years old, his father died following a difficult battle with cancer. 2 years later, the tragedy deepened. His mother suffered a sudden and fatal heart attack. At only 8 years old, Aaron was orphaned, left without the foundation most children rely on for security and emotional growth. In the years that followed, Barley was placed in a series of foster homes and children's institutions, where structure and consistency were often in short supply. Though surrounded by people tasked with his care, he remained emotionally adrift. From 2003 to 2007, he was under the foster care of Eileen Adams, a woman who tried to nurture him despite increasingly unpredictable behavior. She later described him as having two faces. On some days, he could be affectionate, even charming, and seemed genuinely appreciative of attention and kindness. But at other times, he would become withdrawn, reactive, or volatile, seemingly without warning. Eileen recalled moments where his moods could shift rapidly, leaving those around him uncertain of how to respond. During his teenage years, Aaron attended Hunter Hill Technology College in Brahms Grove, Worcestershire. Peers there recalled a boy who had a certain charisma. He was often surrounded by others and was known for cracking jokes and seeking attention. But there was a darker side beneath the surface. Classmates described him as cocky and occasionally aggressive, a student who would push boundaries in ways that made others uneasy. Teachers reportedly noted similar behavior. While capable of engaging in lessons, he could also be disruptive, especially when frustrated or challenged. At the age of 18, Aaron Barley's troubled path took a more serious turn. He was convicted and sentenced to a 3-year prison term after an incident involving an ex-girlfriend. The event, though not publicly detailed in court documents for privacy reasons, was serious enough to warrant incarceration. It marked the beginning of a pattern of behavior that combined personal instability with increasingly concerning decision-making. When Barley later crossed paths with the Wilkinson family, his past came with him, largely invisible, yet never truly gone. By September 2016, several months into his connection with the Wilkinson family, signs of strain began to emerge. Initially embraced as someone deserving of a second chance, Barley had been offered employment by Peter Wilkinson at his safety barrier manufacturing company. But over time, his performance declined. He began arriving late, missing shifts, and exhibiting signs of alcohol misuse that impacted his work and reliability. Peter, a firm but fair employer, tried to manage the situation with patience. Ultimately, though, he made the difficult decision to let Barley go. Despite the dismissal, the separation appeared amicable. Barley gave what would later turn out to be a false explanation for his decline in behavior, claiming that his mother had recently passed away, a statement that raised quiet concern, especially given his earlier life story. Yet even in the face of clear warning signs, the Wilkinsons, led by Tracy's unwavering compassion, continued to offer him support. In late October or early November of that year, Peter returned home to find Barley sleeping outside, curled up on their driveway. The sight deeply affected Tracy. She simply couldn't reconcile the idea of someone she had once welcomed into her home now sleeping outdoors, cold and alone. Against her better judgment, but true to her generous nature, she invited him back into the house for a temporary stay while they worked to secure council accommodation for him. For roughly 2 weeks, Barley lived once again under their roof. During that time, he helped out with small tasks, assisting with housework, performing odd jobs for extended family members, and earning bits of pocket money to pay for daily necessities like food and cigarettes. Outwardly, he seemed thankful. He smiled, completed chores, and maintained a respectful demeanor. But beneath the surface, a darker energy began to simmer. Tracy, known for her empathy and experience from volunteering at the Atlantic House Recovery Center in Dudley, began to notice unsettling changes in his behavior. One day, she quietly confided in another volunteer that Barley had made a comment she found vaguely threatening. She didn't report it, perhaps because she hoped it was a fleeting lapse, or perhaps because she still believed he could be guided back onto a safer path. The family's dynamic with Barley remained complicated. With Tracy, he was attentive, almost reverent, as though he viewed her as a figure of maternal stability that he'd longed for his entire life. He often leaned into her warmth and generosity, perhaps genuinely seeking comfort, or perhaps exploiting it. His Christmas card, which called her the mother I never had, suggested a deep emotional reliance, though whether that attachment was authentic or calculated remains a matter of interpretation. With Pierce, Barley was neutral. The two didn't share much beyond physical proximity during his stays. Pierce was just a teenager, absorbed in school, video games, and football matches with his family. There's no evidence of hostility or significant bonding between them, just polite coexistence. Peter Wilkinson treated Barley with a balance of kindness and caution. While he opened his home and wallet to assist, he also kept a quiet watch over Barley's evolving behavior. As for Lydia, then 19 and away at Bristol University, her contact with Barley was minimal. She saw him only during short visits home, like the one during Christmas, but their interactions were distant and few. By early 2017, the once hopeful relationship between the Wilkinsons and Aaron Barley had grown strained. His presence at their home had dwindled, and he was now living in a modest flat in Brierley Hill, not far from Stourbridge. Those close to him began to observe increasingly erratic and alarming behavior. His former foster carer, Eileen Adams, came across several social media posts filled with angry and aggressive content. Concerned, she reported them to the authorities. The West Midlands police investigated, but crucially, did not connect Barley's behavior to any immediate risk involving the Wilkinson family. Meanwhile, back on Greyhound Lane, Tracy had begun to sense something was wrong. One afternoon, she noticed Barley standing outside their home, just beyond the fence, watching. The moment unsettled her, and she later told a friend about it. Still, she didn't pursue it further. The Wilkinsons continued to hope they had helped someone find stability, but that hope was increasingly misplaced. Barley, in reality, was no longer the grateful young man they had taken in. He had become distant, resentful, and unpredictable. The knowledge he had gained of their home, their routines, and their trust was now being twisted into something deeply troubling. The morning of March 30th, 2017 began in silence. On Greyhound Lane, the Wilkinson family stirred as they always did, unaware of the silent storm already moving toward them. But hidden within their property, danger was already present. Security footage later reviewed by investigators provided a detailed account of Aaron Barley's movements in the hours before sunrise. Sometime after midnight, around 1 a.m., Barley arrived at the Wilkinson home. He wore dark clothing to blend into the night, and in a disturbing detail captured by the cameras, he had slipped black socks over his brightly colored sneakers, a makeshift effort to remain undetected in the shadows. He attempted to gain entry through a window, but finding it locked, he didn't flee. Instead, he silently retreated to the garden shed and hid, waiting through the long night. At approximately 6:30 a.m., as the first light crept over the horizon, Barley emerged from the shed. Security footage captured him moving stealthily, on hands and knees, crawling across the lawn with careful deliberation. His behavior was chilling in its precision. He knew where the sensors were, where the family's movements would begin, and how to remain out of view. Later, in court, Peter Wilkinson would describe Barley's movements as like a ninja, controlled, calculated, and eerily quiet. At around 7 a.m., Peter Wilkinson, as was his daily routine, took the family's greyhound Mandy for her morning walk. It was a simple and familiar act, one rooted in the calm predictability of suburban life. The back door of their home, as usual, was left unlocked. In their quiet community, it had always felt safe to do so. But that small detail, a habit born of comfort, would become the opening that allowed a storm to enter. Unbeknownst to the family, Aaron Barley had been lying in wait. Hidden in the garden, crouched behind a bush for hours under cover of night, he watched, bided his time, and prepared. The CCTV footage later retrieved from the home would show Barley emerging from his hiding place the moment Peter disappeared from view. Dressed in dark clothing, he moved with alarming purpose, stepping into the house through the unsecured back door. He wasn't a stranger. He was someone the Wilkinsons had trusted, someone they had fed, sheltered, and employed. And yet, on that day, he entered not as a friend or a guest, but with a sinister intent that no one could have predicted. Inside, the home was still. Tracy Wilkinson was upstairs, likely just beginning her morning routine, perhaps sipping tea or preparing to wake Pierce. The stillness of the house gave no warning of what was about to unfold. Barley climbed the stairs. His movements were measured, focused. By 7:30 a.m., within the span of a few short minutes, everything changed. What followed inside the home remains documented through official reports, but has been presented to the public with care and sensitivity, out of respect for the victims and their family. What is known is that by the time Peter returned at around 8 a.m., the house he had left just moments earlier had been transformed into the scene of an unimaginable tragedy. As he entered through the garden, Peter would later recall that Barley appeared from a cupboard without warning. The encounter was sudden and terrifying. What took place next was a sustained and violent confrontation that left Peter gravely injured. Despite the severity of his wounds, Peter's instincts kicked in. Struggling to remain conscious, he somehow managed to reach his phone. With hands shaking and breath shallow, he dialed emergency services, gasping out the most vital pieces of information: the name of the man responsible and the registration plate of the family's Land Rover Discovery, which had just been stolen. Meanwhile, Barley had already fled the scene. He drove off in the stolen vehicle, pushing through traffic in a reckless and dangerous escape attempt. Dashcam footage would later reveal him weaving between cars, speeding down residential streets, driving onto pavements, and ignoring traffic rules, all in a desperate effort to evade capture. But police were not far behind. West Midlands police had already mobilized thanks to Peter's crucial call. The chase ended near Dudley when Barley lost control of the vehicle and collided with a wall. Inside the car, officers found the weapon left behind, a chilling reminder of what had just occurred. Barley attempted to flee on foot, but officers quickly apprehended him. The man who had once been the recipient of the Wilkinsons' generosity was now in custody. Peter Wilkinson was rushed to the hospital, where a team of doctors fought to save his life. He underwent emergency surgery and spent 11 days in intensive care. For a time, his survival hung in the balance. When he finally awoke from his coma, he was met not with relief, but with unbearable grief. He learned that Tracy, the love of his life and mother of his children, had not survived the events of that morning. Their daughter Lydia, just 19 years old and studying biology at Bristol University, raced home upon hearing the news. She arrived to a household draped in mourning and a future irreparably altered. With her father still in the hospital and her mother gone, she was suddenly faced with the heartbreaking task of planning a funeral, alone. The community, shaken and grief-stricken, rallied around her. Neighbors left flowers and notes outside the Wilkinson home. One message read simply, "To my mate Tracy, only the good die young. I can't believe your act of kindness ended this way." The loss was not just personal. It reverberated throughout the town. The Wilkinsons had extended a hand of kindness, and that hand had been betrayed in the worst way imaginable. Following his arrest, Barley was taken to a Birmingham police station for questioning. But rather than remorse or reflection, his behavior was described as erratic, cold, and defiant. He was largely uncooperative during his interviews, refusing to answer basic questions or provide samples for forensic analysis. At times, he refused a blood test and declined to assist investigators in understanding the full timeline of events. As hours passed, his demeanor became more disturbing. He reportedly showed no sign of regret for the trauma he had caused. In a conversation with Michael Hazelgrove, the deputy duty director at Winston Green Jail, Barley made a deeply unsettling comment. Referring to the attack, he allegedly said, "I am pleased that I got to." Though brief, those words revealed a mindset void of empathy and lacking any sense of guilt. Detectives struggled to establish a clear motive. Unlike many cases where conflict, revenge, or financial motive are apparent, Barley's actions appeared random, senseless, and deeply personal in their betrayal. Detective Chisholm, who led the investigation, expressed his frustration in a press conference. "He still has not assisted us in gaining a clear understanding of what motivated him or what the reasons were behind this horrific attack. There is usually a buildup, or a motive, or a grudge. But this one, it just feels very random." On April 1, 2017, Aaron Barley appeared at Birmingham Magistrates Court. He was officially charged with counts of murder for Tracy Wilkinson, as well as one count of attempted murder for the attack on Peter. Appearing in court wearing a green hospital-style gown, his arm in a sling, Barley confirmed his name and lack of fixed address. He hobbled as he exited the courtroom, offering no further remarks. The legal system, out of respect for the surviving family, carefully avoided the graphic details of the attack. The courtroom remained focused on justice, not spectacle. And yet, the absence of motive continued to haunt everyone involved. Peter Wilkinson, in time, offered his own insight into what may have driven Barley to act with such cruelty. "My personal feeling is that he'd lost his job. He lost his flat. And he decided that because his life was going badly, he was going to take it out on the people who had cared and looked after him." That theory aligned with the facts. In the months leading up to the incident, Barley had been let go from Peter's company due to problems with alcohol. He'd also lost his council-provided flat in Brierley Hill, and shortly before the attack, the Wilkinsons had ended their financial support, including canceling his mobile phone contract. In the aftermath of the devastating events that forever changed the Wilkinson family, one truth became painfully clear. Aaron Barley's refusal to offer any explanation for his actions only deepened the sorrow. While the physical evidence of his guilt was indisputable, CCTV footage, forensic matches, Peter Wilkinson's emergency call, and Barley's own chilling statements in custody, the emotional weight of the case was made even heavier by his silence. For the Wilkinson family and the wider community that grieved with them, there was no sense of closure, only questions left unanswered. Why had someone they had helped, sheltered, and even welcomed into their home chosen to repay that kindness with betrayal of the highest order? For both the detectives who worked tirelessly to build the case and the family forced to live through its consequences, the lack of motive became one of the most agonizing aspects of the entire ordeal. As the legal process advanced, it was clear that the weight of the evidence left no room for doubt. Investigators had meticulously pieced together the sequence of events. From Barley's surveillance of the home, to his covert movements captured on security footage, to the forensic trail left behind. His own words, uttered without remorse during custody, served as a grim confirmation of intent. What remained was the final act of justice: sentencing. The trial was originally set to begin on October 3, 2017, at Birmingham Crown Court. Families, reporters, and legal professionals gathered for what was expected to be a lengthy and emotionally challenging process. But in a surprising turn of events, Aaron Barley, then 24 years old, arrived in court wearing a plain blue t-shirt and, with a quiet and subdued tone, entered guilty pleas to all remaining charges, including 2 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder. Barley had previously pleaded guilty to the attempted murder charge back in May of that year. His decision to admit to the remaining offenses at the very last minute spared the Wilkinson family the trauma of enduring a full trial. But it did not spare them the emotional weight of the day. The courtroom would now turn its full attention to sentencing, where the prosecution and defense would present their cases, not to determine guilt, but to determine the measure of justice. It was during the sentencing phase that the human cost of Barley's actions became starkly visible. Both Peter Wilkinson and his daughter Lydia delivered powerful victim impact statements, documents that did more than describe grief. They painted a haunting picture of a family torn apart. Lydia, just 19 years old at the time, stood in the courtroom with composure that belied her age. Her words were courageous, clear, and devastating. Facing the man who had upended her life, she declared, "My parents helped you. You repaid them with destruction and heartache. You have obliterated my life. And for this, I will never forgive you." She went on to describe the lingering effects, crippling anxiety, sleepless nights, and the unbearable weight of being left without her mother. She spoke of feeling like a ghost in her own life, a young woman who had lost her foundation. Her testimony moved the courtroom, and Judge Mark Carl later commended her for her remarkable strength, describing her as a person of extraordinary courage and maturity well beyond her years. Peter Wilkinson's statement carried a different tone, one filled with deep sadness and physical pain. The spoke of permanent injuries, ongoing trauma, and the emotional devastation that now defined his life. Still undergoing therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, Peter described the loss of his wife as a wound that would never truly heal. The Crown Prosecution Service, led by Kareem Khalil, presented a case that painted a clear picture of deliberate betrayal. They laid out the timeline. Barley's failed break-in attempts at 1 a.m., his decision to hide in the garden shed for hours, and his eventual approach into the house after Peter left for a walk. The CCTV footage, Khalil argued, was deeply disturbing. It showed Barley crawling through the garden, dressed in all black, his face partially concealed, and even his shoes covered with socks to minimize visibility. These weren't the actions of someone acting out impulsively. They were the premeditated moves of someone who planned every step. Barley had not simply chosen at random house. He targeted a family who had gone out of their way to help him. That calculated abuse of trust, Khalil argued, made the crime even more reprehensible. He described Barley as a manipulator and compulsive liar, highlighting his previous convictions, which included a 3-year sentence for an assault on a former partner. Barley's behavior after the incident only reinforced the prosecution's case. From the callous comments made in custody to his refusal to provide toxicology tests or cooperate with psychological assessments, he demonstrated a complete lack of remorse. Barley's defense team faced an uphill battle. The evidence was overwhelming, and his own guilty pleas had already confirmed the prosecution's timeline. Unable to dispute the facts, the defense focused on mitigating factors, attempting to humanize their client without excusing his actions. They pointed to Barley's traumatic upbringing, losing both parents by the age of 8 and spending much of his life in foster care and children's homes. His early years had been filled with instability, neglect, and unresolved emotional trauma. The defense acknowledged his prior convictions but argued they reflected a pattern of impulsivity and emotional dysfunction, rather than a long-planned intention to harm. Psychiatric evaluations presented in court found no basis for a diminished responsibility plea, ruling out any medical explanation for his behavior. But the defense leaned on Barley's age, just 24 at the time of sentencing, arguing that while his actions were horrific, a whole life tariff would remove any opportunity for rehabilitation or hope of eventual reintegration. However, his silence regarding motive, his refusal to assist with investigations, and his cold demeanor left little ground on which to base a plea for leniency. On October 4, 2017, Judge Carl delivered his sentencing in a solemn courtroom. He sentenced Aaron Barley to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years, meaning that he would not be eligible for parole until at least the year 2047, by which time he would be in his 50s. The judge stopped short of imposing a whole life order, citing Barley's young age as the principal reason. However, he made clear that Barley posed an enduring threat to the public, stating that there was a very significant risk of serious harm to others should he ever be released. Carl spoke at length about the abuse of trust and vicious nature of the attack, condemning Barley for his lack of remorse and the terror he had inflicted. He described the attack as unprovoked, unrelenting, and profoundly cruel. The sentence, while severe, was later reviewed by legal authorities. Solicitor General Robert Buckland filed for a reassessment, arguing the punishment was too lenient given the gravity of the crimes. The court agreed, and Barley's sentence was extended. He's now required to serve a minimum of 34 years before being considered for release. A 911 call led investigators to a remote and desolate area on Victor Street. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they swiftly secured the entire perimeter to preserve any potential evidence. The area, quiet and unsettling, was quickly transformed into the center of a meticulous and urgent investigation. Crime scene investigators and forensic specialists immediately began their work, combing through every inch of the surroundings. They collected samples, documented the scene, and analyzed evidence with the highest level of precision, knowing that every detail could be crucial. Behind the decaying structure, hidden from plain view, officers made a grim discovery. News of the discovery quickly spread, stirring both the media and the local community, who had been anxiously awaiting updates and clinging to hope. That hope was shattered later that evening when, following a detailed analysis and formal procedures, the Memphis Police Department confirmed what many had feared. It was indeed that of Eliza Fletcher. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. Eliza Fletcher, a 34-year-old woman beloved by her community, was not just a teacher. She was a wife, a mother, a mentor, and a role model. Her presence was magnetic, and her influence reached beyond the classroom walls. As a dedicated kindergarten teacher, Eliza nurtured young minds with patience, creativity, and unwavering passion. She was the type of educator whose name former students would remember for decades. Her days were filled with the vibrant energy of children, the enthusiasm of learning, and the heartfelt connections she formed with the families she served. Eliza was married to Richard Fletcher, whom she met during a church service year prior. Their love story began in that sacred space and culminated in marriage there in 2014, surrounded by friends, relatives, and their shared faith. Together, they built a life centered around values, family, and service. They had 2 young sons who were the light of Eliza's life. She came from a family with a long-standing legacy in business. As one of the heirs to Orgill Inc., a prominent hardware supply company headquartered in Memphis, Eliza was born into privilege, but she chose a humble path. Rather than following in the footsteps of her family's enterprise, she chose a career rooted in compassion and growth. Teaching was more than a job for her. It was a calling. First working at Promise Academy in Nashville and later at the prestigious St. Mary's Episcopal School in Memphis, Eliza established herself as a deeply respected educator. The all-girls school, known across Tennessee for its academic excellence, became her new home where she also volunteered her time coaching youth sports, further endearing her to students and parents alike. On the early morning of September 2, 2022, Eliza Fletcher awoke before dawn, embracing the day with her usual sense of purpose and energy. It was a familiar ritual for her, a rhythm she had perfected over the years. As the rest of the city slept under the veil of night, Eliza was already preparing for her daily run. By 4 a.m., she had laced up her running shoes, donned her workout gear, and stepped outside, ready to greet the silence and stillness of the pre-dawn hours. Running wasn't just a hobby for Eliza, it was an integral part of her identity. Her devotion to fitness was both disciplined and passionate. As a dedicated runner, she had built a strong presence in her local athletic community, competing in numerous events and pushing herself to achieve new milestones. Her notable 22nd-place finish in the women's division of the St. Jude Marathon was more than just a number. It was a reflection of her resilience and training. That achievement had earned her a coveted spot in the prestigious Boston Marathon, an opportunity she had been working tirelessly toward. It was a dream for many athletes, and Eliza was finally on the path to making it a reality. Every morning, she followed a familiar route near the University of Memphis campus, often covering approximately 8 miles. For Eliza, these runs were more than physical exercise. They were moments of mental clarity, spaces where she could collect her thoughts and mentally prepare for the challenges of the day. The quiet roads, the rhythmic sound of her footsteps, and the cool morning air all played a part in a routine that brought her balance and peace. Over time, her consistent presence made her a recognizable figure in the area, known not just for her endurance, but for the grace and determination she carried with every stride. But on that Friday morning, something deviated from the norm, something that would send shockwaves through the Memphis community and far beyond. By 6:45 a.m., a local cyclist traveling along one of the sidewalks noticed a collection of items that seemed out of place. There, scattered near the edge of the pavement, were a water bottle, a smartphone, and a pair of sandals. At first glance, it might have appeared to be an accidental drop. But something about the arrangement, the atmosphere, and the time of day triggered the cyclist's intuition. Trusting his instincts, he chose to alert the authorities, unaware that his decision would play a crucial role in the unfolding of a larger, deeply concerning situation. Not long after, Richard Fletcher contacted the Memphis Police Department. His voice trembled with urgency and worry as he explained that his wife, Eliza, had not returned home. He had tried calling her phone repeatedly, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. The growing silence wasn't just unusual, it was terrifying. The discovery that her personal belongings had already been found along her route sent an icy wave of dread through him. As detectives began their investigation, their first step was to gather surveillance footage from various locations along Eliza's running path. The footage, compiled from multiple sources, initially showed a familiar and comforting scene. Eliza jogging in her signature bright pink athletic top and blue-violet shorts. Her stride was strong, focused. She looked like she had a purpose, as she always did. But then something shifted in the video. A dark-colored GMC Terrain SUV appeared in the frame. It was observed circling the same area more than once, as if scouting the location. Eventually, it slowed to a halt on the side of the road, just ahead of Eliza. A man quickly exited the vehicle. What occurred next was quick but disturbing. A brief, sudden skirmish, enough to be captured on camera, even if the finer details were obscured. Moments later, Eliza was no longer visible. The SUV remained parked for approximately 4 minutes before speeding away. Investigators noted every detail they could extract from the grainy footage. Though the lighting was dim and the camera's resolution was limited, they made several critical observations. One of the SUV's headlights appeared to be damaged, and while the license plate wasn't fully legible, enough of the characters were visible to assist law enforcement in narrowing down potential matches in their database. Strangely, the sandals left behind at the scene were confirmed not to belong to Eliza. This curious detail raised serious questions. It suggested that the footwear could have been unintentionally dropped by the individual involved in the incident, potentially offering crucial forensic evidence. The items were collected and promptly sent to a laboratory for DNA analysis, as authorities hoped they might uncover a lead from them. By Sunday, the urgency of the situation had escalated dramatically. What had started as a missing person report had grown into a full-scale search operation. The Memphis Police Department mobilized with full force, working in coordination with the Shelby County Sheriff's Office, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and even the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The combined resources of local and federal agencies created a powerful response team. Together, they deployed drones, search dogs, and foot patrol units. Aerial support scanned large areas from above, while ground teams meticulously combed through wooded zones, alleyways, and nearby residential areas. A mobile command center was quickly established near the University of Memphis, serving as the operational hub for investigators. Law enforcement officers canvassed the neighborhood, speaking with residents, reviewing additional surveillance tapes, and following up on dozens of tips pouring in from concerned citizens. Public alerts were issued, including images of Eliza taken from the surveillance video, as well as snapshots of the SUV. The hope was simple but urgent, that someone, somewhere, would recognize the vehicle or the person behind the wheel and come forward with information. Her family, overwhelmed with heartbreak yet driven by unwavering determination, stepped forward to address the public in a deeply moving and emotionally resonant statement. The message, shared on behalf of her devoted husband Richard, her nurturing mother Adele, her steady and compassionate father Beasley, her protective brother Gil, and a close-knit extended family circle, served as both a thank you and a plea. We want to begin by expressing our deepest gratitude for the outpouring of support, encouragement, and prayers we've received, the family said. Eliza's warmth and kindness have left a lasting impression on every person fortunate enough to know her. The overwhelming response we've seen, from friends, neighbors, strangers, and even people halfway across the country, is a powerful reminder of how many lives she touched. We are so grateful to all the law enforcement agencies who have worked tirelessly during this difficult time. We have cooperated fully and shared every detail we are aware of with the investigators. It is our sincere hope that, with the community's continued help and awareness, Eliza will be brought home safely. Our greatest wish is to be reunited with her. In a strategic and heartfelt effort to engage the community and encourage anyone with information to come forward, the family took an additional step. They publicly announced a financial reward for any leads that could result in Eliza's safe return. Though the exact amount of the reward was initially kept confidential out of caution, the underlying urgency was unmistakable. Their message carried the weight of love, desperation, and a profound belief in the goodness of people. The impact of the case quickly reached beyond just the circles of family and friends. It caught the attention of city leaders and citizens alike. Jennifer Sink, Memphis's chief legal officer, personally addressed the public, revealing through a heartfelt tweet that she was, in fact, Eliza's aunt. In her statement, she implored anyone with knowledge, however small, to reach out to authorities immediately. Her public acknowledgement added a human and deeply personal layer to the case, reinforcing how far-reaching this tragedy had become. It was no longer just a city's concern, it was a family's worst nightmare. Despite mounting attention, the police refrained from revealing new specifics about potential suspects or leads. Their silence was intentional and strategic. Investigators remained actively engaged, continuing to sift through evidence, follow up on tips, and maintain clear and open lines of communication with the public. Updates were shared with great care to avoid compromising the investigation. It was confirmed that law enforcement teams were working tirelessly, day and night, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of truth and justice. What befell Eliza Fletcher in the quiet, early hours of that morning remained a source of intense pain and confusion for her family, her students, her friends, and the broader Memphis community. Despite the lingering questions, one thing was clear. The unwavering spirit of the community was shining through the darkness. The collective outpouring of compassion, unity, and resilience gave her loved ones a small beacon of light in their darkest hours. The reverberations of the heartbreaking incident extended well beyond the family unit, echoing across the country and resonating particularly with the running community. Eliza, an avid runner, had embodied the joy and peace that many find in early morning jogs. Her story struck a deep chord with runners nationwide, especially women who, like her, often lace up their shoes before sunrise or after sundown. In response, local running clubs and fitness communities sprang into action. They began organizing awareness campaigns that promoted safety measures, such as running in pairs or in small groups, using GPS-enabled devices, and avoiding secluded routes. These practical suggestions were widely circulated through online forums, social media platforms, and local news outlets, as individuals sought ways to reclaim their routines while also prioritizing safety. The search effort for Eliza quickly grew into a citywide mission. For her loved ones, every passing hour felt unbearably long, marked by anxiety, longing, and prayer. With breaking hearts and voices heavy with emotion, the family made a second public appeal, this time revealing that they were offering a reward of $50,000 for any credible information that could help locate Eliza. The message spread rapidly across television networks, digital platforms, and word of mouth, amplifying public awareness and generating renewed urgency. Behind the scenes, law enforcement personnel continued an intensive investigation. They examined surveillance camera footage from nearby neighborhoods and businesses, analyzed cell phone data, and gathered eyewitness accounts. Following established investigative procedures, authorities also conducted a thorough search of Eliza and Richard Fletcher's home. This included collecting the couple's shared laptop, a vehicle, and various personal belongings, measures that ensured no potential lead was overlooked. Although officials were quick to assure the public that the incident seemed to be isolated, believed to involve a random assailant, speculation on social media quickly spiraled. Amateur sleuths and internet commentators, in a troubling development, began casting suspicion on Richard Fletcher himself. Fueled by misinformation and assumptions tied to the family's prominent background, some online voices theorized about potential motives linked to wealth or inheritance. These baseless accusations only deepened the trauma faced by Eliza's family, who were already enduring unimaginable distress. As time went on and the investigation progressed, the truth gradually came to light. When authorities eventually confirmed the identity and motives of the actual suspect, many of those who had spread rumors publicly retracted their statements. Several individuals issued formal apologies, acknowledging the harm caused by their premature judgments. The investigation into Eliza Fletcher's disappearance took a pivotal and dramatic turn just a few days after she was reported missing. What began as a deeply concerning missing person case swiftly evolved into something far more complex and troubling. On the morning of September 4th, a major breakthrough occurred when officers discovered a dark-colored GMC Terrain parked in a lot. The vehicle immediately drew attention due to its distinctive front-end damage, which was consistent with images captured in surveillance footage from the morning Eliza was last seen. Detectives were quick to act, and upon further examination, forensic analysts discovered a pair of sandals near the scene that would soon become a key piece of evidence in the case. When those sandals were sent for DNA analysis, the results pointed to an individual well known to law enforcement authorities. The genetic material matched Cleotha Abston, also known by the surname Henderson. This connection was not just a random coincidence. Abston, 38 years old at the time, had a long and deeply troubling history with the criminal justice system, one that spanned nearly 3 decades. His first encounters with law enforcement dated back to when he was just 11 years old. Throughout his life, his criminal record expanded to include a range of offenses, such as theft, aggravated assault, and unlawful possession of weapons. Perhaps most notably, Abston had served a significant prison sentence, 20 years behind bars, following his conviction in a serious abduction case that occurred in the late 1990s. That incident had also shocked the local community and led to heightened awareness of repeat offenders. Despite the severity of his earlier crimes, Abston had been released from incarceration just a few years before Eliza's case emerged, raising serious questions about how effectively the system was monitoring individuals with a known propensity for high-risk behavior. In a development that further highlighted the eerie parallels between past and present events, one of Abston's previous victims, Kemp Duran, came forward to share his personal story. Duran recounted the traumatic events that unfolded in the year 2000, when he was pulled into a vehicle during the early hours of the morning by Abston and another individual. It was only through sheer luck and presence of mind that Duran managed to escape, called for help, and ultimately attracting the attention of bystanders. In the aftermath, Duran expressed deep gratitude for his survival and voiced his concern that another innocent person may have fallen victim under similar circumstances. During Abston's 2-decade incarceration, prison officials recorded at least 19 disciplinary infractions related to misconduct and behavioral issues. These infractions included violations that raised red flags about his adjustment and readiness for re-entry into society. Despite the documented pattern of problematic behavior, Abston was ultimately released without any structured mandate for close supervision or continued oversight. As soon as the DNA evidence was confirmed and all signs pointed toward Abston, law enforcement officials acted swiftly and decisively. He was taken into custody and formally charged with especially aggravated kidnapping and tampering with physical evidence. At this stage in the investigation, Eliza Fletcher had still not been located, and despite a mounting wave of public outcry, Abston refused to cooperate with investigators. He did not offer any statements or leads regarding Eliza's whereabouts, even as pressure continued to intensify from both the authorities and the public. Further investigative efforts included tracing cell phone data that placed Abston in the precise area where Eliza was last seen on the morning she vanished. His vehicle had also been captured on several neighborhood surveillance cameras during the critical time window. These digital breadcrumbs added more weight to the theory that Abston was directly involved. In addition, several neighbors came forward with reports that, shortly after the incident, they had noticed Abston exhibiting strange and suspicious behavior. Witnesses described seeing him meticulously cleaning the inside of his SUV with strong-smelling chemicals and hurriedly washing his clothes in a sink, a set of actions that suggested an effort to eliminate any potential forensic evidence. 3 days into the investigation, a local judge reviewed the evidence presented thus far and set Abston's bond at $500,000. In a press briefing held that day, law enforcement officials emphasized that the investigation remained active and ongoing. They reassured the public that every available resource was being used to uncover the truth and locate Eliza. Teams of officers, forensic specialists, and analysts were working around the clock, determined to collect additional evidence and construct a clear and compelling case that would link Abston to the disappearance beyond reasonable doubt. Community members were urged to remain vigilant and report any relevant information that could aid in the case. On the afternoon of September 5th, exactly 4 days after Eliza Fletcher was reported missing under troubling circumstances, the Memphis Police Department released a somber update that would confirm the community's worst fears. At approximately 5:07 p.m., officers were dispatched to a location roughly 7 miles away from where Eliza had last been seen. The call led them to a desolate property on Victor Street, specifically to the rear of a vacant duplex that had long been abandoned and stood in stark contrast to the vibrant life Eliza had once lived. Upon arrival, authorities secured the perimeter and immediately initiated a full forensic investigation. The area was cordoned off with care, ensuring that every inch of the surroundings was examined meticulously. Forensic experts and crime scene investigators worked through the evening, collecting samples and analyzing evidence with precision and urgency. It was there, behind the derelict structure, that officers discovered a body. Though the official identification process had yet to be completed, the gravity of the discovery sent ripples through the investigative team, the media, and the tight-knit community that had been holding out hope. That hope was shattered later that evening when, following a detailed analysis and formal procedures, the Memphis Police Department confirmed what many had feared. It was indeed that of Eliza Fletcher. Her identity was confirmed through forensic testing conducted by the department's specialized lab technicians. Nearby, a discarded bag was recovered. Inside it, investigators found garments matching the description of what Eliza had worn during her early morning run, items that had been circulated widely on missing person flyers and social media in the days prior. As part of the autopsy protocol, a toxicology screening was conducted to help provide additional insights. The report noted the presence of certain external substances, though investigators emphasized that it remained unclear how long the substances had been present in her system, or whether they played any direct role in her death. Officials were careful to handle this information with sensitivity, refraining from speculative commentary out of respect for the ongoing case and Eliza's grieving family. News of the confirmation cast a heavy pall over Memphis. The community, which had rallied so passionately around the search for Eliza, was now united in mourning. Vigils were held across the city, from community centers to churchyards, with perhaps the most poignant gathering taking place at the school where Eliza had taught and inspired so many young minds. There, former students, teachers, parents, and school staff came together in remembrance. They shared stories, shed tears, and offered prayers, describing Eliza as a bright light, a compassionate educator, and a person whose energy and kindness made a lasting difference in the lives of others. A makeshift memorial began forming outside the school's entrance. It started with a few bouquets of flowers and handwritten notes, but quickly grew to include hundreds of tributes, photos, poems, stuffed animals, and candles. It became a sacred space, a symbol of collective grief and love that grew hour by hour. In a press conference held shortly after the announcement, a lead investigator offered a statement that encapsulated the emotions of the entire task force. While the outcome of this investigation is not what we had hoped for, we are relieved to have taken a dangerous individual off the streets. Our thoughts are with the Fletcher family, and we thank the public for their unwavering support throughout this difficult time. That emotional statement signaled the close of one chapter and the opening of another: the pursuit of justice. In the months that followed the loss of Eliza Fletcher, the criminal case expanded significantly, growing in both complexity and scope. What had started as a search and rescue mission had evolved into a full-blown legal battle, complete with multiple charges, courtroom hearings, and broader implications that extended beyond a single tragedy. The man at the center of the investigation, Cleotha Abston, was swiftly arrested and initially charged with aggravated kidnapping. However, as more information surfaced and investigative efforts intensified, prosecutors filed an expanded list of charges. These included first-degree murder, identity theft, unlawful use of a credit card, and theft of property under $1,000. It soon became clear that Abston's criminal history stretched far back, with a pattern of prior offenses that raised serious questions about systemic accountability. Adding another layer to the case, authorities also arrested Abston's brother, Mario Abston. Though his charges were unrelated to Eliza's case, he was found to be in possession of illegal firearms during the commission of a separate felony. The arrests of both brothers sent shockwaves through the Memphis community, reinforcing the urgency of reviewing protocols around criminal rehabilitation and community safety. As these legal developments unfolded, media coverage spread far beyond local headlines. National outlets picked up the story, and the name Eliza Fletcher became a symbol of collective sorrow and resilience. Public discussions emerged about safety, the criminal justice system, and the need for preventative action. For many across Tennessee and the broader U.S., the case represented more than just a crime. It represented a reckoning. Despite the pain and public attention, the Memphis community chose to meet tragedy with strength. Just 1 week after Eliza's disappearance, citizens organized a deeply emotional public tribute called "Let's Finish Liza's Run." The event invited runners and non-runners alike to retrace the route Eliza had planned to complete on that fateful morning. The turnout was extraordinary. Long before dawn, crowds began to form. By 4 a.m., the time Eliza typically began her run, participants had gathered in large numbers, creating a sea of people united by grief, love, and solidarity. At 4:20 a.m., the symbolic 8-mile journey began. The route traced Central Avenue and South Goodlet, now lined with flickering candles, flowers, and heartfelt messages written in chalk. Families, neighbors, and strangers alike walked and ran in silence and reflection, honoring the life of a woman who had come to represent so much to so many. While the community remained strong and resolute, the criminal justice process also began to unfold. Despite law enforcement's assertion that the evidence against Cleotha Abston was overwhelming, including surveillance footage, forensic matches, and eyewitness accounts, he initially entered a plea of not guilty. The plea marked the start of what would likely become a lengthy and high-profile trial. For Eliza's family, friends, and all who had come to know her story, the fight for justice was just beginning. His trial was formally scheduled for February 2025, with the prosecution announcing their intent to pursue the death penalty, a decision that underscored the gravity of the crimes for which he stood accused. But the developments did not stop there. It soon came to light that Abston had also been implicated in a previous unrelated case involving a young woman named Alicia Franklin. Alicia had bravely come forward to report that she had been abducted by Abston in 2021, more than a year before Eliza's case. However, due to delays in the processing and matching of DNA evidence, no immediate arrest had been made at that time, and the incident had not been connected to Cleotha. This procedural delay allowed him to remain free. Eventually, authorities were able to link Abston to Alicia's case through DNA and other corroborating evidence. In a separate trial, criminal court judge Lee Coffey announced the verdict. Cleotha Abston was found guilty of aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, and unlawful possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. For his crimes against Alicia Franklin, he received a sentence of 80 years in prison, which would be served without the possibility of early release. Shortly after the conclusion of the Alicia Franklin case, an unexpected shift occurred in the proceedings regarding Eliza's case. After months of consultations with his legal counsel, Abston's defense team announced that their client would change his plea. In a brief but intense courtroom session at the end of 2024, Cleotha Abston pleaded guilty to all charges related to the kidnapping and murder of Eliza Fletcher. The court accepted the plea, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His attorney addressed the press following the hearing, stating, "We had been meeting with him regularly over the past several months. The evidence was overwhelming. We advised him that going to trial would not be in his best interest. There was no viable path to success. This was the only reasonable resolution." The judge presiding over the case clarified that by pleading guilty, Abston had waived his right to appeal, meaning there would be no extended legal battles, no retrials, and no drawn-out appeals process. The decision brought a level of closure to a case that had left an emotional scar on so many. In a written statement submitted after the sentencing, Eliza Fletcher's family expressed both the depth of their grief and the impact the tragedy had on their lives. The letter was powerful, direct, and deeply emotional. "We have no idea what happened to you to turn you into someone so filled with a desire to hurt others. Whatever it was, it does not excuse or explain what you have done. "You have changed our lives forever. Nothing will ever be the same again. You took Eliza's life, even though she had never harmed you. In fact, knowing her, she would have been the first to help you if you needed it." The statement captured the heartbreak of a family who had lost a mother, a wife, a daughter, a sister, a teacher, and a friend, someone whose generosity and spirit had touched everyone she met. The cases of Eliza Fletcher and Alicia Franklin brought more than just courtroom outcomes. They also brought legislative change. In response to the delay in processing evidence in Alicia's case, lawmakers introduced and passed a bill requiring the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to issue quarterly public reports on the timelines of DNA testing from forensic kits related to assaults. This move aimed to improve transparency, prevent delays in justice, and ensure critical evidence doesn't sit in backlogs unnoticed. Eliza Fletcher was remembered not for the tragedy that ended her life, but for the joy, faith, and inspiration she brought into the world. Her husband, her 2 sons, her parents, her brother, and countless others, friends, fellow teachers, church members, and students, spoke often of her radiant smile, her boundless energy, and the compassion she showed to everyone she encountered. To those who knew her, Eliza was many things: a loving mother, a devoted wife, a faithful believer, an enthusiastic educator, and a role model whose influence extended well beyond the classroom. The outpouring of love in her memory was a testament to the life she led. Her legacy now lives on in the changes she inspired, the communities she united, and the stories of kindness and courage told by those who had the privilege of knowing her. Acting on a tip, detectives made their way into a densely wooded area located off a quiet country road. At first glance, the forest appeared untouched, serene even. There were no obvious signs that anything was out of place, but investigators knew better. They spent hours combing through the thick underbrush with precision and care. Eventually, their worst fears were realized. They found of Joanna Simpson. As the investigation progressed, detectives became increasingly convinced that this wasn't a spontaneous act driven by emotion. It had all the hallmarks of a carefully planned and deliberate crime. Then came a breakthrough from an unexpected source: Alex and Katerina. During follow-up interviews, both independently recalled being taken to that exact forest just a few days before Joanna was discovered there. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. Joanna Grace Simpson was born on a warm summer day, August 20th, 1964, in the historic city of York, nestled in the ceremonial county of North Yorkshire, England. From the very beginning, it was evident that Joanna had come into a life of privilege and opportunity. Her parents, Diane Parks and Christopher Simpson, were respected figures in their community. Christopher was a self-made businessman who owned and operated a successful construction company that had grown into one of the most prominent firms in the region. Their family was affluent but not flashy, prosperous, yes, but grounded. Joanna was their only child, and her parents poured all their love, attention, and resources into her upbringing. Her early education took place at a prestigious all-girls private school in York, where she thrived academically and socially. In the mid-1970s, Christopher made the decision to sell his multi-million-pound construction enterprise. He had spent years building the business from the ground up and was ready for a quieter life. The family relocated to the Isle of Man, a serene and picturesque island in the Irish Sea known for its rolling hills and tight-knit communities. They purchased a beautiful estate in Laxey, a quaint town with a population of only around 2,000 residents. There, Joanna transferred to Bwan School, which was affiliated with King William's College, a respected educational institution with a long history. Later, she went on to complete her studies at Oxford High School, continuing to excel across subjects. People who knew Joanna often described her as a rare blend of intellect and empathy. She was warm, dependable, and incredibly responsible, traits that remained with her throughout her life. Friends sought her advice, teachers praised her character, and even adults found themselves impressed by her poise and clarity of thought. She radiated confidence without arrogance, and her loyalty was unwavering. Whether someone needed a study partner, a shoulder to cry on, or just someone who would truly listen, Joanna was always there, After graduating from high school, Joanna pursued higher education at the University of Bath. There, she studied business modeling and entrepreneurship, a fitting choice given her sharp analytical mind and creative thinking. Initially, she dreamed of following in her father's footsteps by launching her own construction firm in London. However, during her university years, she discovered a deep interest in hospitality and decided to shift gears toward the hotel industry. She envisioned creating beautiful, welcoming spaces where guests could feel completely at ease, luxury with a personal touch. Despite her many academic and professional ambitions, Joanna remained deeply compassionate and grounded. She maintained close friendships and often volunteered for local charities and student-led initiatives. She believed in giving back, and she lived those values daily. Her presence had a calming effect on others, and she had a natural ability to lead without dominating. She made others feel heard, seen, and valued. Not to be overlooked was Joanna's striking beauty. Tall, elegant, and naturally radiant, she turned heads wherever she went. However, she never let this distract her. While she had many admirers, Joanna remained focused on her goals. After completing her degree, Joanna moved to the ceremonial county of Berkshire in the south of England. Joanna purchased a modest hotel near Windsor Great Park, a beloved destination for tourists and locals alike. Thanks to her hard work and impeccable taste, the business flourished. Within a few years, it had developed a loyal clientele and become a reliable source of income. By 1994, Joanna had reached a new milestone. At age 30, her longtime partner, whom she had been dating for several years, asked for her hand in marriage. He was from a similarly privileged background and had also built a successful career in business. The couple seemed like an ideal match. Their values aligned, their social circles overlapped, and both were driven yet down to earth. Their wedding was a grand affair attended by around 200 guests, including not only family and friends, but also business associates and a handful of media representatives. Elegant photos of the joyful occasion were later featured in local society pages, and the couple became well-known figures in their community. Shortly after the wedding, the couple bought a large, centuries-old mansion in Ascot. Though the property needed extensive renovations, they saw it as a passion project, a blank canvas they could transform into their dream home. The restoration took about a year, with Joanna personally overseeing much of the design work. The result was stunning, a perfect blend of historical charm and modern comfort. They even converted an entire wing of the house into a guest suite for visiting relatives and friends. During this time, Joanna remained devoted to her hotel business, and the property continued to thrive under her care. She was not yet thinking seriously about starting a family, preferring to focus on solidifying her career and enjoying her marriage. However, her husband had different priorities. He spoke frequently about wanting to become a father, and his desire grew more intense over time. Joanna, while not opposed to the idea, wanted to wait. She asked for patience, for time to prepare emotionally and professionally. Unfortunately, their conversations often escalated into disagreements. Over time, the tension between them deepened. By the end of 1997, just a few years into their marriage, it became painfully clear that they were no longer on the same page. The dissolution of Joanna's marriage came quietly, without the bitterness or public drama that often accompanies such life-altering events. There were no shouting matches, no accusations hurled in anger, and no messy legal battles that played out in court. Instead, the end came like a quiet sigh, the inevitable conclusion to a relationship that had gradually worn thin. The couple, once filled with so much hope, simply acknowledged that they had grown apart. It was as calm and civil as a breakup could be. The house, the beautiful, centuries-old mansion in Ascot that they had restored with such care and dedication, was awarded to Joanna. It wasn't just a legal decision, but one that came with mutual understanding. Joanna had contributed significantly more time, energy, and finances into transforming the property into a home. Her former husband, perhaps feeling remorseful for having initiated the separation, signed over full ownership without resistance. Outwardly, Joanna tried to maintain her composure. She smiled when people asked how she was doing, nodded politely when friends offered their sympathies, and kept up with her business duties as best she could. But behind closed doors, she was battling a growing emotional heaviness that began to weigh down every aspect of her life. The breakup had left a deep scar, and even though she hadn't shown it to the world, the loneliness and heartbreak crept in slowly but steadily. What began as a vague sadness soon deepened into a quiet depression, one that didn't come with loud cries or visible breakdowns, but instead with long silences and sleepless nights. Her closest friend, someone who had known her since childhood, noticed the shift. This friend, a seasoned international flight attendant who had seen countless lives unfold from airport terminals to faraway cities, suggested a change of scenery. She invited Joanna to join her on a trip to South Africa. It wasn't a formal vacation, more of a tag-along opportunity while the friend fulfilled her flight assignment. The idea was simple: a temporary escape. No obligations, no pressures, just a new environment and a chance to breathe again. Joanna hesitated at first. She wasn't in the mood for adventure or exploration, but something in her said yes. Perhaps the last flicker of her old self, the part of her that still believed healing was possible. She packed lightly, planning only to be gone a few days. She didn't imagine for a second that this trip would mark the beginning of a new and far more complicated chapter in her life. Once they arrived in South Africa, her friend introduced her to someone she thought Joanna might enjoy talking to. That someone was Robert Brown, a commercial pilot with an easy smile and an air of self-assurance that bordered on charismatic. Their first conversation took place over dinner with mutual friends. Joanna found herself captivated. Robert had been born the same year as Joanna, 1964, in the vibrant Scottish city of Edinburgh. But their upbringings couldn't have been more different. While Joanna had been raised in affluence, surrounded by privilege and elite education, Robert came from a more humble background. His father had worked long hours in a shipyard, while his mother had spent her career as a bank clerk. His life was shaped by modesty, discipline, and the steady grind of hard-working parents. Still, Robert had achieved something admirable. He had pursued his dream of flying and graduated from a respected aviation college, eventually becoming a professional pilot. His story, in its own way, was a testament to determination and ambition. By the time Joanna returned to England, she and Robert were officially a couple. Their connection had intensified quickly, and neither saw a reason to delay things. Before long, Robert had moved into Joanna's home, the very mansion she had once shared with her ex-husband. Within just a few short weeks, she introduced him to her parents, Diane and Christopher. Their reaction was one of concern, not celebration. To them, the situation felt rushed. Joanna had just gone through a divorce, and now here she was, starting a serious relationship with someone they barely knew. Robert was polite during that first meeting, but something about him set off alarm bells. He was articulate and undeniably charismatic, but there was a subtle arrogance behind his charm, a sharp edge that put Diane and Christopher on guard. He seemed dismissive at times, quick to dominate the conversation, and not particularly interested in getting to know them beyond surface-level pleasantries. Despite their private reservations, Joanna was clearly swept off her feet. She spoke of Robert as if he had breathed life back into her, and any attempts to express concern were gently deflected. To her, Robert represented a fresh start, a second chance at the love and companionship she had been missing. By the late summer of 1998, barely a season after their first meeting, Joanna and Robert were already discussing marriage. The whirlwind pace of their romance left her friends speechless and her parents deeply uneasy. When Christmas arrived, Robert proposed with little fanfare but great enthusiasm. Joanna accepted without hesitation. This time, she said, she didn't want a grand, lavish affair. Her first wedding had been large and traditional, and it hadn't brought her lasting happiness. For her second marriage, she preferred something small and intimate. Just 15 guests, only their closest friends and immediate family. No photographers, no media attention, and no big reception. Robert seemed perfectly fine with this arrangement. But Diane and Christopher were blindsided when they learned the wedding was scheduled for February 1999, barely 2 months after the engagement. They had only met Robert twice, and neither encounter had reassured them. They didn't want to interfere in their daughter's life, but they also didn't want to stand by silently. After several candid discussions, they convinced Joanna to at least take one protective measure: a prenuptial agreement. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but it was a necessary one. Joanna agreed, not because she doubted Robert, but because she wanted to ease her parents' minds. The wedding went ahead just as planned, quiet, low-key, and attended only by a tight circle. For their honeymoon, the couple chose to return to South Africa, the place where their story had begun. Joanna hoped this trip would cement the joyful memories of their first meeting and serve as a celebration of a new chapter. At first, everything appeared fine. They checked into one of the region's most luxurious hotels, and Joanna allowed herself to relax. She imagined long walks along the coast, candlelit dinners, and quiet moments that would help them start their life together on the right foot. But the honeymoon turned out to be anything but romantic. From the very beginning, Robert's demeanor began to shift. In public, he was curt with the hotel staff, sometimes outright dismissive. He seemed to look down on them, speaking in a tone that made Joanna cringe. Where once he had seemed confident, now he seemed condescending. His arrogance, which had once been slightly charming in small doses, became oppressive and frequent. Joanna spent much of the trip apologizing on his behalf, trying to smooth over awkward encounters and shield the staff from his temper. Behind closed doors, Robert grew more impatient and demanding. He nitpicked over small things: restaurant reservations, room service delays, even the way the curtains were drawn. Joanna was stunned. The man she had married was beginning to feel like a stranger. She kept thinking, had I missed the signs? Did I fall for someone I didn't really know? Just 1 week into their honeymoon, Joanna found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, unsure of what she had gotten herself into. In its place was an unsettling quiet, filled with second thoughts. One evening, while Robert was out of the room, she picked up the hotel phone and called her mother. Diane's advice was clear. When she got back home, she needed to file for divorce immediately. Despite everything she had seen on their honeymoon, despite the arrogance, the distance, and the alarming changes in his behavior, Joanna chose not to walk away. In her heart, she still hoped that things could improve. She told herself that maybe Robert had been under stress, that maybe the trip had magnified their differences unfairly. People made mistakes, after all, and perhaps, with time, he would soften. Joanna wasn't one to give up easily. She had built her life with resilience and dedication, and she wanted to extend that same determination to her marriage. So she gave Robert another chance. She stayed. Shortly after their return to England, Joanna discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a shock, not because she wasn't ready to be a mother. She had always imagined herself having children someday, but because of how complicated her circumstances had become. Her marriage was already under strain, and now this development added another layer of uncertainty. When she shared the news with Robert, she was hoping, perhaps even expecting, a moment of connection, something that might bind them closer together. But instead of joy, what she received was cold indifference. Robert's reaction was a turning point, even if Joanna didn't fully realize it at the time. He didn't smile. He didn't offer reassurance or express excitement about becoming a father. If anything, he seemed more emboldened, more controlling. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he likely assumed that Joanna wouldn't leave now, not while expecting his child. And with that perceived security, his demeanor grew even more dismissive and detached. By then, Robert had already made himself unwelcome at the home of Joanna's parents. Diane and Christopher, who had always been warm and open with Joanna's friends and partners, couldn't hide their discomfort around him. He spoke to them as if he were doing them a favor just by showing up. Joanna often found herself apologizing on his behalf, smoothing things over, trying to pretend it was all manageable. But her parents saw through it. They pleaded with her to consider leaving him before it was too late. Yet Joanna stayed. She told them that she didn't want her child to grow up in a broken home without a father. She was trying to build something that looked like a family, even if it didn't feel like one. In November 1999, Joanna gave birth to their first child, a baby boy named Alex. He was healthy, beautiful, and instantly became the light of her life. Motherhood gave Joanna renewed purpose. She poured herself into caring for her son, waking up for late-night feedings, singing lullabies, and creating a peaceful environment, even within the walls of a house that felt increasingly cold. But while Joanna glowed in her new role, Robert remained emotionally absent. He barely acknowledged the baby's milestones, rarely offered help, and never seemed genuinely interested in fatherhood. Not long after Alex's birth, Joanna discovered she was expecting again. This second pregnancy came with even more emotional complexity. There had been no healing, no progress in their relationship. If anything, things had become more strained. Still, she moved forward with cautious hope. In the spring of 2001, their daughter Katerina was born. She was as beautiful as her brother, and Joanna tried with all her strength to focus on the joy of raising two young children. But if Joanna had hoped that parenthood would soften Robert, those hopes were quickly dashed. He remained cold and disconnected, treating his role as a father more like a reluctant obligation than a privilege. Joanna noticed that even when he was home, his attention was elsewhere. He rarely spent time with the children unless it was necessary. He never played with them or showed them affection in the way that came so naturally to her. When they cried, he seemed irritated. When they laughed, he barely looked up. Professionally, Robert had a successful career as an international airline pilot. He traveled frequently for work, often spending long stretches away from home. While some might have assumed this lifestyle brought excitement or freedom, Joanna found it only brought more isolation. When Robert did return, he didn't come home with stories or souvenirs or joy. He came back moody, detached, and dismissive. Instead of reconnecting, he treated his time at home as an inconvenience. Even among his peers, Robert had a reputation for being closed off, short-tempered, and standoffish. He had few close friends, and most colleagues kept him at arm's length. The family continued living in their Ascot mansion, located on the exclusive and affluent strip often referred to as Millionaire's Row, not far from the stunning Windsor Great Park. The location was ideal for Robert, who needed easy access to Heathrow Airport. But the grand home, once a dream project, no longer felt like a sanctuary. Its walls echoed with silence and tension. Joanna tried to make it a safe and loving space for her children, but the emotional toll was beginning to show. Robert's behavior never escalated beyond verbal hostility. He wasn't physically aggressive, something Joanna held on to, perhaps unconsciously, as the reason she continued to stay. The insults and coldness were bad, but they hadn't crossed a certain line. Yet everyone close to the family could see how deeply Robert's presence was eroding Joanna's spirit. Her light was dimming, her laughter less frequent. The once vibrant woman who had traveled the world and built a successful business was now living in a shadow of what should have been a fulfilling life. By early 2007, after nearly 8 years of emotional distance, silent dinners, and growing despair, Joanna reached a breaking point. It was January when she finally made the first move. She contacted a trusted family attorney and arranged an initial consultation to discuss filing for divorce. What finally pushed her to act was an explosive argument that had come out of nowhere. Robert had accused her of having an affair, a completely baseless claim. There was no evidence, no reason, no behavior to justify the accusation. Joanna was shocked not only by the words, but by the venom behind them. In February, things took an even darker turn. Robert confided disturbing thoughts during one of their many arguments. His words were vague but unsettling, dark enough that Joanna felt a knot of fear in her stomach. For the first time, she was truly afraid of what he might be capable of. She could no longer dismiss it as moodiness or stress. Something had shifted. Just a few weeks later, an incident pushed everything over the edge. Joanna had gone to pick up Alex and Katerina from school, as she always did. While waiting outside, she had a short, friendly conversation with a fellow parent, a man whose children were in the same classes as hers. It was nothing more than a casual exchange. But when Robert saw it, he reacted explosively. Back at home, he accused her once again of infidelity. But this time, the confrontation escalated beyond words. That night, Joanna knew it was over. There was no more hoping for change, no more trying to protect the illusion of a family. She told him clearly and firmly their marriage was finished. Robert, in response, issued a chilling ultimatum. He told her she could file for divorce if that's what she wanted, but under no circumstances would he allow her to leave with their children. That, he said, was non-negotiable. The very next day, Joanna made the most important decision of her life. She took Alex and Katerina and fled to the Isle of Man, seeking shelter in her parents' home. There, surrounded by the people who loved her unconditionally, she filed for divorce. But the process was not simple or quick. Robert countersued almost immediately, arguing that he still wanted to preserve the family. He claimed Joanna was trying to cut him out of his children's lives, painting himself as the victim. It was a complete reversal of reality, and it dragged the proceedings into a complicated legal battle. To make matters worse, Robert refused to move out of the Ascot mansion. Even though Joanna had legal ownership of the home, he insisted on staying, claiming he needed to be close to his children. For nearly 6 months, the couple, now separated in every emotional sense, continued to live under the same roof. The tension was unbearable, the environment stifling. Eventually, Joanna had no choice but to take the matter to court. With the help of her attorney, she obtained a legal order that forced Robert to vacate the property. At last, he left the house, but the divorce was still pending. Custody arrangements had yet to be finalized. Joanna remained cautious. Surprisingly, once he moved out, Robert adopted an entirely different demeanor. He became eerily calm. No more outbursts, no more threats. He followed the custody schedule precisely, picked up the children when he was supposed to, and returned them without issue. It was almost too smooth. Within a short time, Robert began a new relationship with a coworker and eventually moved in with her. The pace of Robert's new relationship seemed almost scripted, as though he was racing toward something rather than building anything genuine. Within just a few short months of moving in with his coworker, she became pregnant. The news made its way to Joanna through a mutual acquaintance. Her first reaction wasn't bitterness or jealousy. It was relief. She believed that now, with Robert starting a new family of his own, he might finally lose interest in interfering with her life. Perhaps, she hoped, he would become too preoccupied to continue his disruptive behavior or to obsessively meddle in her affairs. But that was wishful thinking. Behind the scenes, while outwardly playing the part of a new partner and soon-to-be father, Robert was working with legal counsel to try and undermine the prenuptial agreement he had signed years earlier with Joanna. The same contract that had protected her assets, her hotel business, the Ascot property, and her personal finances was now his target. He claimed the agreement had been unfair and that circumstances had changed since the time it was signed. The move came as no surprise to Joanna's attorneys, but to her, it was another reminder that her ex-husband had not moved on in spirit, even if he had in appearance. Although they were now divorced and living separate lives, Joanna and Robert were still tied together by their most important responsibility: co-parenting Alex and Katerina. That alone required a level of cooperation that Joanna found increasingly difficult to maintain. Every exchange with Robert came with a sense of dread. His moods were unpredictable, and she never knew whether he would be civil or cold, quiet or confrontational. Over time, Joanna made it a point to avoid being alone with him during handoffs. Whenever possible, she arranged for pickups and drop-offs to happen in public places or with someone else present. It was a small layer of protection that offered her some peace of mind. That uneasy routine continued until October 31st, 2010, a day that began like any other but would end in heartbreak and suspicion. Robert had taken the children to visit his parents for the school's fall break. On Halloween, he was supposed to return them to Joanna's home in Berkshire. Joanna's parents had gone away for a short trip, and for the first time in a while, she was alone at the house. She wasn't worried. She had always handled herself with grace and strength, even in awkward situations. But the next day, November 1st, everything changed. At approximately 10 a.m., 2 separate calls came into the local police station. The first was from Diane and Christopher Simpson, Joanna's parents. They had returned from their trip and tried repeatedly to reach their daughter by phone and text with no response. It was unlike her. Joanna always kept in touch, especially when the children were involved. Concerned that something might have happened, they reported her missing. The second call came directly from Robert Brown. He arrived at the station in person, unannounced, and told officers that something had occurred at his ex-wife's home. His statements were vague. He didn't say Joanna was hurt or missing, only that he had been involved in a situation. His vague demeanor, combined with the already filed concern from Joanna's parents, prompted officers to take him in for questioning immediately. Officers were dispatched to Joanna's home. Her car was still in the driveway, keys still inside, and the back door was slightly ajar. Nothing looked ransacked, but something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, too still. The officers announced themselves, entered the home, and began a systematic search. Joanna was not there. Her phone and handbag were on the kitchen counter. In the living room, a coffee mug sat untouched on the side table, and a folded newspaper lay open to a crossword puzzle, half finished. To trained investigators, these details painted a picture of someone who had been interrupted suddenly. Back at the station, when police informed Robert that Joanna's parents had reported her missing and voiced serious concerns about him possibly being involved, Robert's composure visibly cracked. He stopped answering questions, requested legal counsel, and shut down completely. However, investigators soon learned that before coming to the station, Robert had dropped off Alex and Katarina at his parents' house. The children might have witnessed something, or at the very least overheard it. Specialized child welfare officers were brought in to speak with Alex and Katarina in a supportive, non-threatening setting. Both children were cooperative and calm, but visibly confused. They shared that on the day they were supposed to return home, they had been playing in another room when they heard their parents arguing. On the drive back, Robert had told them their mom wasn't feeling well. He said she needed to go to the hospital and that he would take her there himself. When Alex asked if everything was okay, Robert reassured them that it was. He dropped them off at their grandparents' house, promising he'd return shortly. But he didn't return until much later that night, alone, and gave no further explanation. Armed with that information, detectives went back to Robert. When they shared what the children had said, he initially stayed silent. But after a long pause and with his lawyer present, Robert finally spoke. He admitted that he and Joanna had argued that day. He claimed that during the argument, he lost his temper. His explanation was disjointed. He said things had escalated, that he hadn't meant for it to go as far as it did. Then he said something that made everyone in the room go still. He told them he had planned to take Joanna to the hospital, but by the time he tried to check on her, it was already too late. According to Robert, panic took over. Instead of calling for help or seeking immediate assistance, he chose to cover it up. He admitted to moving Joanna, but insisted he had acted out of fear, not calculation. Investigators didn't believe him. The inconsistencies in his story were glaring. Under pressure, Robert eventually offered to show investigators where he had left Joanna. He led them to a dense woodland area off a rural road, roughly a mile from his parents' home. From the outside, the forest looked undisturbed. But after several hours of meticulous searching, officers discovered what they had feared. They found Joanna Simpson. Their suspicions that this was not a crime of passion but a premeditated act grew stronger by the hour. The final confirmation came from an unlikely source: Alex and Katarina. In follow-up interviews, both remembered visiting that very same forest just days earlier. Robert continued to insist that he hadn't planned any of it, that he had snapped in the heat of the moment and reacted poorly. But his actions told another story. Moreover, in earlier interviews, Robert had made subtle, bitter remarks about Joanna and her family. He referred to her as a spoiled princess and claimed that she'd never struggled for anything in her life. Despite the mounting evidence of premeditation, when the case went to trial in May 2011, the courtroom witnessed a surprising turn. The jury, after hearing weeks of testimony and reviewing the forensic evidence, returned a verdict that stunned many people watching the case closely. They concluded that Joanna Simpson's death had not been premeditated. The outcome, he received a 25-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole after serving just over half that time. 13 years, to be exact. In 2013, just 2 years after his sentencing, Robert was evaluated by the parole board. The board reviewed his conduct in prison, psychological evaluations, and testimony from professionals. Ultimately, the board made a clear and firm decision. Robert still posed a significant risk to society, and he would not be released. He remained behind bars, and his parole was denied.